It appears President Trump was up late last night watching election results. In a flurry of rambling social media posts, he weighed in on why Republicans lost across the board. Just after 10 p.m. Eastern, Trump offered this excuse for the sweeping nationwide GOP losses, writing, quote, "Trump wasn't on the ballot and shutdown were the two reasons that Republicans lost elections tonight." About an hour later, he posted again, calling for the passage of so-called voter reform, pushing for voter ID laws, ending mail-in voting, and eliminating the filibuster. During New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani's victory speech, Trump also posted in all caps, "And so it begins." Meanwhile, the official White House Instagram account posted a modified version of the Knicks logo that read, "Trump is your president," presumably a reaction to Mamdani's win. And we saw Mamdani was pretty defiant when talking about Trump last night. But today in Washington, a big case about Trump and one of his signature policies, because the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in the case of Trump's use of emergency powers to enact sweeping tariffs on U.S. trade partners. The case is going to have major implications on America's economic policy and also test the bounds of executive authority.
All right, friends, welcome back to Dr. John Podcast Family. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 against Trump's use of federal troops for domestic purposes, with Chief Justice Roberts writing, "We have no kings in America," a direct rejection of Trump's claim to deploy the military for political ends. The court found he violated the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act, blocking his most brazen power grab with language that echoes through history. The composition of the ruling makes it even more devastating for Trump. Two of the justices who voted against him were his own appointees, Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, judges he personally nominated to the highest court in the land, judges who conservatives believed would be loyal to him, and they voted against him on a case that went directly to the heart of his attempts to interfere with the electoral process, a case that involved his efforts to position federal troops in Democratic cities right before the midterm elections.
While the Republican majority court has often ruled in favor of the president, legal experts say this could be a toss-up. The Constitution gives Congress the power to impose taxes, but soon after taking office, Trump declared that a 1977 law gave him the power to impose tariffs unilaterally during emergencies. The statute gives the president certain tools to deal with any unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States. That includes the power to regulate imports. The president's lawyers say that language gives him broad authority to impose tariffs when he believes an emergency exists. And therein is the crux of the Supreme Court's problem. MSNBC legal affairs reporter Fallon Gallagher joins me here on set. She has, of course, been following this case. You're going to go to the Supreme Court a little later this morning. Can you explain what we expect to hear today, what we're watching for as this begins?
Yeah, Allie. So just like you touched on it, the president's argument here is that this is a national emergency. And because it's a national emergency, he, as the president of the United States, has the authority to impose these tariffs as he chooses. Now, a lot of the critics here are saying
this is a betrayal that Trump cannot explain away or dismiss as partisan politics. When your own appointees say you violated the Constitution, when the justices you put on the court turn against you, there is no remaining argument that the system is rigged against you. The system is simply doing what it was designed to do, constraining executive overreach and upholding the rule of law. And Trump's response has been exactly what you would expect. A meltdown on Truth Social, where he called the justices disloyal, claimed Barrett and Kavanaugh had betrayed him, asserted that Roberts had always hated him, and insisted the court was corrupt and political and wrong. But his opinion doesn't matter anymore. The court has ruled, the law is settled, and Trump has to comply. And he did comply on New Year's Day, pulling all federalized guard troops back without a fight, without defiance, without any of the resistance that would have characterized the Trump of a few months ago. The speed and totality of Trump's collapse is breathtaking when you step back and take in the full picture.
A trade deficit does not constitute a national emergency.
Yeah, I was going to say, is getting ripped off a national emergency?
No, and quite frankly, on the converse side of that, the small businesses who have sued in this case are saying that these tariffs are a national emergency for their businesses, for their companies, for the consumers, for the American consumer who this tax will ultimately pass on to. So those people are saying that not only is this an emergency for them, and that's why they've sued, but that this is a separation of powers issue, that Congress is the one who has the authority to implement these tariffs, not the president unilaterally, and that, quite frankly, to them, this is like taxation without representation, which you'll remember we fought a whole entire war about.
Yeah, I think I read something about that.
Yeah. So, these people are really, really upset, and they think that they have a strong case here, and they thought, why not me? So that's why they're suing here.
So that's why they're the plaintiffs in this case. And we've even seen some members of Congress in the Senate, they're largely messaging votes because they're not going anywhere. But when it comes to specific tariffs and other trade policies that the president has done, you've even seen in bipartisan fashion some rebukes, some uncomfortability with the way that this White House has done them unilaterally without.
He has now lost support from all three branches of government. The legislative branch, through the Senate's vote to restrict his war powers, has told him he cannot unilaterally start military conflicts. The judicial branch, through this Supreme Court ruling and other decisions, has stripped him of the immunity he claimed and blocked his most aggressive power grabs. And the executive branch, his own cabinet, has seen multiple members resign and testify against him, confirming the worst allegations about his conduct. Kristi Noem testified about Project 2026 and the explicit plans to deploy military and DHS resources to polling places to intimidate voters and create chaos. Mark Meadows testified about Trump's belief that presidential power was essentially unlimited and his disregard for legal constraints.
Bringing in Congress. So I think the open question here for a court that gave the president broad immunity, is this a moment for them to finally say there is a limit to how much we will allow this president to do?
Well, and that's what's really interesting here. This is the same court that last year granted President Trump, this same sitting president, immunity to do as he chooses. Now, what's really interesting here is that this case came through that emergency docket, which we've been talking about, that shadow docket a lot, where things are fast-tracked and then maybe sent back down to the lower court. Now, this is the second time that justices have said, you know what, we're not just going to rule on this with an unsigned brief order. We actually want to hear arguments on that. And so that's kind of, if I'm paying attention closely, that's what makes me think that this could be different. And perhaps this is the time where they could say, no, maybe that's too far. I mean, you have to remember, this is the John Roberts court, and this is a court that's skeptical of too much government overreach. But then at the same time, you have justices like Brett Kavanaugh, who have been supporters of broad presidential authority. So I think it'll be really interesting to see who questions what today. And I'll be inside the court looking. I'll be paying very close attention to.
And now the Supreme Court has confirmed that those plans were illegal, that they violated the Posse Comitatus Act, that they represented the behavior of a king rather than a president. There is no institutional support left for Trump, nowhere to turn, no branch of government that will protect him from the consequences of his actions. The language of the ruling itself is a brutal rebuke of Trump's entire approach to governance. Chief Justice Roberts, in his majority opinion, begins by laying out the history of the Posse Comitatus Act, explaining that after the Civil War and Reconstruction, Congress recognized the danger of using federal troops for domestic law enforcement. The law was designed to prevent military rule, to protect civil liberties.
Justice Barrett, who sometimes has a tendency to swing from the rest of the so-called conservative justices. But really, we won't know probably in the immediate future how they're going to go. This is something that we might not actually know the answer to until June.
Well, I was going to say, because the timeline on this is so important, given the fact that Trump is actively negotiating what he's calling trade deals, what are actually more like handshake trade agreements. But the fact that other countries are going to have to abide by whatever these levels are that he's been setting, whether it's 10% or 15%, 57%. I mean, there's so many numbers across the board, depending on which country you're talking about. There's real implications, not just for those countries and their relations with the U.S., but for the consumer who's like, okay, where's my stuff coming from and how much am I paying for it? So when might we actually see a decision?
Yeah, well, I mean, so now that this is on the merits docket, it's not going to be one of those cases where we get an immediate decision that just might pop up in my email, brief unsigned order. This is something that we will likely get on a decision day. And as we've seen, this is a blockbuster case this term, which I want to make that abundantly clear. This is probably the biggest case on their docket right now. Historically, they've waited until the end of the term, that late June, early July, to release those big headline decisions. So it could be then, it could be earlier. I mean, they fast-tracked this to get it on the schedule. This is one of the earliest dates. You'll remember that the Supreme Court started its term in October.
To ensure that civilian authorities maintained control over domestic affairs. Roberts then applies this history to Trump's actions with devastating infuriating precision. He notes that Trump's justifications don't meet the legal standards. Chicago has crime, but it's not an invasion. Portland has protests, but they're not an insurrection. These are domestic policy challenges that should be handled by local and state authorities, not by federal troops under presidential command. And then Roberts makes clear that Trump's real motivation was political, that the timing and targeting of these deployments suggests they were about the upcoming elections, not about legitimate law enforcement needs. This is the language of judicial rebuke, a federal judge telling the president that his actions were not just wrong, but dangerously wrong, that they threatened the constitutional order itself. The concurring opinions from Kavanaugh and Barrett are even more pointed. Kavanaugh writes that when he was confirmed, he took an oath to the Constitution, not to the president. He emphasizes that judicial independence requires ruling against the president when the president is wrong. And he makes clear that Trump's attempt to federalize the Guard was clearly wrong, clearly illegal, and clearly motivated by improper political purposes. His concurrence reads like a rebuke, not just of this specific action, but of Trump's entire approach to power, his belief that he can do whatever he wants, that he's above the law, that everyone should be loyal to him personally rather than to their constitutional duties. Barrett's concurrence is more technical, but equally damning. She focuses on the text and history of the Posse Comitatus Act, explaining in detail why Trump's actions don't fit any of the statutory exceptions. She emphasizes that Congress specifically wanted to prevent presidents from using military force for political purposes. And that's precisely what Trump was doing. The dissenting opinions from Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch argue that the president has broad authority as commander-in-chief, but even they don't really defend Trump's motivations. They focus on legal technicalities about the scope of presidential power, rather than defending what Trump actually did. The immediate effect of the ruling is that all federalized Guard units deployed to Chicago, Los Angeles, Portland, and anywhere else Trump sent them have been withdrawn. Trump complied on New Year's Day, issuing the orders and sending the troops home. There was no drama, no defiance, just compliance. And that's significant because it shows Trump knows he's beaten. Sources say he discussed defying the court internally, but his advisors told him that would be political suicide, that defying the Supreme Court would guarantee impeachment conviction, that it would give prosecutors another crime to charge him with, that it would destroy what little support he has left. So Trump backed down, and his compliance is itself a defeat. The Trump of 6 months ago would have fought, raged, defied. But this Trump is broken, out of options, just trying to survive day by day. His presidency is effectively over, and this ruling has sealed his fate. The political implications of this ruling are massive because it confirms everything that Kristi Noem testified about. She said Trump was planning to use federal forces to interfere with the 2026 midterms, and the Supreme Court just said those plans were illegal. That's corroboration of cabinet testimony by the highest court in the land, and it's enormous for the impeachment trial. Senators can now say we're not just relying on Noem's word, we're relying on a Supreme Court ruling. The court has confirmed Trump was breaking the law. How can we not vote to convict when even Trump's own court appointees say he violated the Constitution? This ruling also ties into Mark Meadows' testimony because Meadows testified that Trump didn't care about legal constraints, that Trump thought he could do whatever he wanted, that Trump believed presidential power was essentially unlimited. And now the Supreme Court is saying, no, presidential power has limits, clear limits, limits that Trump violated. So Meadows' testimony and the court's ruling reinforce each other, both painting a picture of a president who thinks he's above the law and acts accordingly. The connection to the D.C. Circuit immunity ruling is also critically important because that ruling said Trump can be prosecuted for crimes. And this Supreme Court ruling confirms that what Trump did with the National Guard was illegal. So prosecutors can now point to the Supreme Court and say, look, they've already ruled this was illegal. Now we just need to prove Trump knew it was illegal when he did it. And with Meadows' testimony and Noem's testimony and all the other evidence, that's easy to prove. This Supreme Court ruling ruling is going to be evidence in Trump's eventual criminal trial. It establishes that his actions were not just politically controversial, but legally prohibited. It provides a foundation for criminal charges related to his use of military forces for political purposes. And it reinforces the broader narrative of a president who systematically violated the law and abused his power. The international reaction has been interesting as well. America's allies are relieved to see that the American system of checks and balances still works, that the Supreme Court will rule against the president when necessary. That rule of law still means something in the United States. This ruling actually helps restore some American credibility globally after weeks of chaos and dysfunction. The Supreme Court showed that institutions still matter, that courts can still constrain executive overreach, and that's important for America's standing in the world. Republicans in Congress are using this ruling as cover to abandon Trump. They're saying, look, even the Supreme Court says Trump overstepped, even Trump's own appointees ruled against him. So it's not partisan to oppose Trump. It's not betrayal. It's following the law. And that gives Republicans permission to vote for impeachment conviction without looking like they're caving to Democrats. The Supreme Court gave them the cover they needed, and they're going to use it. The impeachment trial in the Senate is now the main event, and this ruling has fundamentally changed the dynamics. Before the ruling, there were senators who were looking for an excuse to vote for conviction, who were uncomfortable with Trump's conduct, but worried about the political consequences of voting against him. Now they have that excuse. A Supreme Court ruling from Trump's own appointees saying he violated the Constitution is the kind of cover that senators need to justify a vote for conviction. They can say to their constituents, I didn't want to remove a president from my own party, but even the Supreme Court said he broke the law. Even his own appointees turned against him. I had no choice. I had to follow the Constitution. The question of Trump's immediate future has become a matter of weeks, not months. Even if somehow Trump survives impeachment, which he won't, he's a lame duck. He can't use military force thanks to the War Powers Resolution. He can't federalize the Guard thanks to this Supreme Court ruling. He can't conduct foreign policy. He can't pass legislation. He can't make appointments. His presidency is functionally over. He's just occupying space until he's formally removed or forced to resign. Trump's got maybe 2 weeks left, 3 at most. That's it. Everything he wanted to do in a second term, gone. Every plan he had, blocked. He's going to leave office in disgrace, having accomplished nothing except becoming the first president removed by impeachment. And the criminal trials that will follow his removal are going to be even more devastating. Prosecutors have been waiting for this moment, building cases against Trump for years. They've got indictments ready to go. Trump's going to be arraigned, he's going to have to post bail or be detained, he's going to face trial, and he's going to be convicted because the evidence is overwhelming, because his own staff testified, because his own documents prove his crimes. The 2026 midterms are going to be an extinction-level event for Republicans. Voters are watching all this, and they're going to punish the party that enabled Trump. Democrats are going to run on the fact that Trump's own Supreme Court appointees ruled against him, that Trump violated the Constitution so badly that even conservative justices said no, that Republicans defended Trump right up until he was removed from office. That's devastating campaign material. Every Republican candidate is going to have to explain their support for Trump. Every Republican is going to have to defend why they didn't act sooner, and voters aren't going to accept those explanations. Democrats are going to gain 50, 60, maybe 70 House seats. They're going to have a supermajority. They're going to flip Senate seats in red states. They're going to win governorships everywhere. This is going to reshape American politics for a generation, and it all traces back to Trump, to his chaos, to his lawlessness, to his refusal to respect constitutional limits. The Republican Party is going to pay the price for Trump for the next decade. Trump's headed to prison. Not maybe, not probably, definitely. His immunity is gone. The courts have confirmed he committed crimes. His cabinet and staff testified against him with evidence. Prosecutors are ready to indict. And now the Supreme Court has ruled he violated federal law. That's another charge, another crime, another piece of evidence. Jack Smith is going to indict Trump for January 6th crimes. New York's going to indict for financial fraud. The IRS is going to pursue tax evasion. Judge Boviberg might hold him in contempt. And this Supreme Court ruling means prosecutors can charge him with illegal use of military force. Trump's going to face trials in multiple jurisdictions. He's going to be convicted in at least some of them. And he's going to go to prison. A former president in federal prison, unprecedented, historic. But it's going to happen because Trump broke too many laws, because the evidence is overwhelming, because his own people testified against him. There's no escape. The constitutional system is going to hold him accountable in ways that he never thought possible. Trump's lawyers are going to try to use the Supreme Court ruling as evidence that the system worked, that Trump was constrained without needing impeachment, that removal isn't necessary because Trump's already powerless. But that argument isn't going to work because senators are going to say if Trump violated the Constitution this badly, if his own appointees ruled against him, that shows how extreme his overreach was. The Supreme Court ruling actually strengthens the case for conviction. It proves Trump can't be trusted with presidential powers, so he needs to be removed. The vote on conviction is probably going to happen within 2 weeks. Senators have heard enough testimony, they've seen enough evidence, they're ready to vote. And the vote's going to be close, in the sense that you need 67 senators to convict, which requires 18 Republicans joining all Democrats. But we're going to get there because enough Republicans have finally decided Trump's gone too far, that they can't defend him anymore, that they need to save the party by cutting him loose. So expect something like 69 or 70 votes for conviction. A clear majority, bipartisan, historic. Trump will be removed from office. The possibility of Trump resigning before the conviction vote has been discussed in his inner circle, but his ego probably won't let him. He'll probably refuse to resign, insist on fighting to the end. And that means he'll be removed, voted out. And that will be his legacy forever. The president who was so corrupt and lawless that he was removed from office. Even his own party abandoned him. Even his own court appointees ruled against him. And he was removed. That's how Trump's presidency ends. After removal, the criminal trials begin immediately. Prosecutors have been waiting for this moment. They've got indictments ready to go. Trump's going to be arraigned. He's going to have to post bail or be detained. He's going to face trial, and he's going to be convicted because the evidence is overwhelming, because his own staff testified, because his own documents prove his crimes. Trump thought he'd be president for life, that he'd be above the law forever. Instead, he's going to spend his final years in prison. That's justice. That's accountability. That's what happens when you think you're a king in a country that rejected kings. The Republican Party is going to spend years trying to rebuild. They're going to have to purge Trump's influence. They're going to have to return to actual conservatism based on principles, not personality cult. They're going to have to win back moderate voters who fled because of Trump. That's going to take a decade, maybe more. And even then, Trump's stain on the party might be permanent because voters don't forget. History doesn't forget. And Trump's going to be remembered as the worst president in American history. The most corrupt, the most lawless, the first to be removed by impeachment. That's Trump's legacy, and it's permanent. The constitutional system proved stronger than Trump. That's the real lesson here. Trump tried to break democracy. He tried to act like a dictator. He tried to use military force for political purposes. He tried to steal elections. He tried to stay in power through any means necessary, and the system stopped him. Congress stopped him. Courts stopped him. His own cabinet stopped him. The Constitution worked. Checks and balances worked. Rule of law worked. Trump lost. Democracy won. The role of the Supreme Court in this process cannot be overstated. They were the final bulwark against Trump's overreach, the institution that had the authority to definitively say no to a president who thought he could do whatever he wanted. And they rose to the occasion. They put aside any political considerations and followed the law, even when it meant ruling against a president who had appointed some of them, even when it meant risking the wrath of Trump and his supporters, even when it meant being called disloyal and corrupt. They did their duty. They upheld the Constitution. They protected the rule of law. And in doing so, they helped save American democracy from a president who would have destroyed it. The no kings principle that Roberts invoked is not just a rhetorical flourish. It is the foundational principle of American governance. The founders rejected monarchy because they had seen its abuses, its corruption, its tendency toward tyranny. They built a system of checks and balances precisely to prevent any one person from having unlimited power, and that system has now worked exactly as intended. Trump tried to become a king. The courts, Congress, and his own cabinet stopped him. The system held. The connection between this ruling and the broader impeachment narrative is critical to understanding why this moment is so decisive. Noem's testimony about Project 2026 provided the evidence of Trump's intent. Meadows' testimony provided the evidence of Trump's disregard for legal constraints. The Supreme Court's ruling provides the legal confirmation that Trump's actions were illegal. Together, these three elements form a complete case for conviction and removal. Intent, disregard for the law, and actual illegality confirmed by the highest court in the land. How can any senator vote to acquit in the face of that? How can any Republican defend Trump when even their own Supreme Court appointees have said he broke the law? The answer is they can't. They won't. The conviction vote will happen, Trump will be removed, and the final chapter of his presidency will be written. The weeks ahead are going to be chaotic and dramatic. The Senate impeachment trial will reach its conclusion. Trump will be removed from office. The vice president will become president, and then the criminal prosecutions will begin. Trump will face trials in multiple jurisdictions for multiple crimes. He will be convicted and sentenced to prison. His properties will be seized. His assets will be frozen. His political career will be over, and the Republican Party will begin the long process of rebuilding itself without him. This is the end of the Trump era. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. Not with defiance, but with compliance. Not with a fight, but with a surrender. Trump is beaten. His presidency is over. His power is gone. And soon, his freedom will be gone too. The only question is how much longer he can delay the inevitable. The lesson of all this is that democracy works. It's messy, it's slow, it's frustrating, but it works. The institutions that the founders created to constrain power worked. The checks and balances that they designed to prevent tyranny worked. The rule of law that they established to govern the country worked. Trump tested the system more thoroughly than any president in American history. He pushed against every limit, violated every norm, ignored every constraint. And the system pushed back. The courts pushed back. Congress pushed back. Even his own cabinet pushed back. The system held. Democracy survived. And now Trump is going to face the consequences of his actions. He's going to prison. He's going to lose everything. And that's justice. That's accountability. That's America. So this is where we are. The Supreme Court has ruled Trump has lost. His presidency is effectively over. His impeachment conviction is coming. His criminal trials are coming. Prison is coming. And there's nothing Trump can do to stop any of it because he destroyed himself. Because his own actions led here. Because he couldn't respect limits or laws or democratic norms. And now he's paying the price. The full price. This is the end of Trump's presidency. This is the end of Trump's political career. This is probably the end of Trump's freedom. And we all watched it happen. Week by week, scandal by scandal, betrayal by betrayal. It all led here to this moment, to this Supreme Court ruling that confirmed Trump's not a king. He's just a man who broke the law, a man who's going to face consequences. And that's how it should be. That's justice. That's America.